Hey there and welcome. Today we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most important and maybe most misunderstood pieces of digital law out there, the GDPR. We're going to break down what it is, why it's such a big deal, and most importantly, how it puts you back in the driver's seat when it comes to your personal data.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You land on a new website, you're trying to read an article or check something out, and bam! Before you can do anything else, this banner pops up asking you to accept all cookies. Have you ever stopped to think, why is this everywhere now? Well, you're about to find out. The short answer to that cookie question is this thing called the GDPR. That stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It's a huge law that came out of the European Union, and it totally rewrote the rules for how companies have to handle our data online. The whole point was to shift the power away from big companies and put it back in our hands.
So here's the game plan for our explainer. First, we'll get right into what the GDPR actually is. Then we'll dive into the 7 core principles that are like its soul. After that, we'll unpack the awesome rights it gives you. Then we'll flip the script and look at the rulebook companies have to follow, what happens when they don't, and finally, how this one European law is changing the whole world's approach to privacy. Okay, so first things first, what is the GDPR really? It might sound super complex, but the whole thing is actually built on just a handful of key concepts. Let's break those down. Everything, and I mean everything, starts with this phrase, personal data. Now, the GDPR's definition for this is incredibly broad. It's not just your name and phone number. It's literally any piece of information that can be tied back to you, the person, or as the law calls you, the data subject. And when I say broad, I mean really broad. We're talking about the obvious stuff, like your name and email. But it's also your phone's location data, your browser search history, and even the super sensitive stuff, like your health information, your biometric data, like a fingerprint, or even your political opinions. If it's about you, it's personal data. Period. Now, the law also draws this really important line in the sand between 2 different roles. First, you have the data controller. This is the organization that decides why and how your data gets used. Think of a social media company. Then you have the data processor. This is a different company that just handles the data for the controller, like maybe a cloud storage service. Knowing who's who is absolutely critical because it determines who's responsible when something goes wrong. All right, so now that we've got a handle on what data the law protects, let's get to the heart of it all. The GDPR is built on 7 foundational principles. You can think of them as the constitution for how your data has to be treated. Yep, 7 of them. These aren't just suggestions, they are the absolute, non-negotiable rules of the road. Any company doing anything with your data has to follow every single one of these principles. Now, we won't walk through all 7 just yet, but let's highlight a couple of the real game changers. For instance, principle number 3, data minimization. This one is so simple but so powerful. It just means companies can't be data hoarders. They can only collect the absolute minimum they need to do the job. So if you're signing up for an email newsletter, all they need is your email. They can't ask for your birthday and home address just because they feel like it. And then there's this one, accountability. This is the principle that gives the GDPR its teeth. It's not good enough for a company to just say they're following the rules. They have to be able to prove it. They need the paperwork, the policies, the records to demonstrate that they're compliant. In other words, the law says, show your work. And here they are, all 7 laid out together. You can see how they create a full life cycle of protection for your data. It starts with being lawful, fair, and transparent. No more sneaky data collection. Then it has to be for a specific purpose. We talked about only collecting the minimum amount of data. That data has to be accurate, and you can't just keep it forever. Of course, it has to be kept secure, and it's all wrapped up in that final accountability piece. It's a pretty solid shield. So the GDPR sets all these rules for companies, which is great. But what's even better is what it does for you. It gives you a specific set of rights. Honestly, you can think of this as the Bill of Rights for your digital life. And these rights are seriously powerful. I mean, think about it. You can go to any company and demand a full copy of every single piece of data they have on you. If any of it is wrong, they have to fix it. You have the right to be forgotten, meaning you can tell them to just delete your data. You can even take all your data, like your photos or your contacts, and move it over to a competitor. And maybe best of all, you have the absolute right to say, hey, stop using my info for marketing, and they have to stop. Okay, so let's flip the coin. We know our rights, but what does this look like from the company's side? What do they actually have to do every day to make sure they're following the rules?
Well, one of the most famous and maybe most stressful obligations is this one, the breach notification rule. If a company gets hacked and your data is exposed, they can't just sit on that information. The clock starts ticking. They have just 72 hours, that's 3 days, to report that breach to the authorities. That is a very tight deadline, and it forces companies to be ready.
And that leads to the big question, right? What happens if they don't follow the rules? What if they miss that 72-hour window? Well, the GDPR is not a suggestion. It comes with some of the most eye-watering fines on the planet to make sure companies take it seriously. The law basically has two levels of financial pain. For smaller slip-ups, the fines can go up to 10 million euros or 2% of the company's yearly global revenue. But for the really bad stuff, for violating the core principles we talked about, the penalties jump to a maximum of 20 million euros or a staggering 4% of global turnover. And that 4%, that is the number that makes CEOs sweat. Because it's not 4% of their profit, it's 4% of their total global turnover, their total revenue for the entire year, whichever number is bigger. For a huge tech company, that can mean fines in the billions. This is designed so no company can ever treat a fine as just the cost of doing business. And trust me, these are not just empty threats. Regulators have been swinging the hammer. Google got hit with a 50 million euro fine for not being clear enough about ads. The clothing store H&M got a 35 million euro fine for illegally spying on its own employees. Even the dating app Grindr was fined over 6 million for sharing user data improperly. The message from regulators is crystal clear: play by the rules or pay up. What's so amazing about this story, though, is that it didn't just stay in Europe. The GDPR was so powerful and so comprehensive that it created a ripple effect. It's now setting the gold standard for data privacy all around the world. You can see that influence right here. When you compare the GDPR to big privacy laws in places like California and Brazil, you see a lot of similarities. But I want you to look closely at that top row, the consent model. Brazil, like the EU, chose a proactive opt-in model, but California went with a reactive opt-out model. And that small difference, it points to a huge difference in philosophy. Let's break that down because it's so important. The GDPR's opt-in approach means companies have to get your explicit yes before they can do anything with your data. The power starts with you. California's opt-out approach is the opposite. It says companies can basically use your data by default until you find the right button and tell them to stop. It's a subtle but really profound difference in who has the power from the get-go. And all of this brings us to a final, pretty big question. The GDPR was created to put us, the individuals, back in control. As more and more of our lives go online and become data, it forces us to ask, has data privacy moved beyond just being a legal topic? Is it becoming a new fundamental human right? That's something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me today.